Tell us again how big GE is.
Well, by what metric? I mean, $150 billion of revenue. That's okay. 300,000 employees.
So it's working
100
out.
countries. Yeah, it's worked out. I always like to say we were started by the Steve Jobs of his time, this guy named Thomas Edison, about 130 years ago. So we've had a couple of iterations since then.
Yeah, so you and I have had a chance to work together, which has been great, and I've gotten to learn a lot about what you do and what GE does. But for a lot of the people in this audience, they're learning about this for the first time. So first of all, what is a chief marketing officer?
Well, a chief marketing officer, certainly in a GE context, is somebody who is there to drive for market-back innovation. In an engineering company, we make have great technology and make great, amazing things, but they have to be tethered to a market. So I'm a big advocate for connecting the great science and things that we do to a customer need, to a market. So it starts with innovation. It starts with the customer.
And when we first met, I remember you were really the one who made the case to me that there are startups inside GE. What does that mean?
Well, I think the reason we clicked is we firmly believe, like you do, that entrepreneurs are everywhere. They exist in every company, inside and outside. So I think that's the premise by which we look at that. You tend to think of a big company and you think, well, how could you, probably many of you as entrepreneurs, you don't have GE on the top of your list of what your next startup's going to be. But we have to keep reinventing ourselves. Again, you don't get to be a 130-year-old company without knowing how to heed change, without having people who really understand where to pivot, where to keep going. So for us, I think we look at entrepreneurism as internal and external opportunities. And we've had to do a lot more to give permission, resources, freeing up the entrepreneurs inside, and then within ourselves be humbled and realize we don't have all the answers. We need to partner a lot more externally and to figure out new ways to partner that doesn't just mean it's our way, it's a shared vision.
And so give us an example of a startup. I know you've recently gotten into the battery business, for example. What's an example of a successful startup in the GE context?
Well, that's a good one. I think a decade ago, Jeff Immelt, our chairman, he had this idea of let's make sure we have a guaranteed pipeline of internal incubated businesses. I like to call it a protected class of ideas. You have to do that, and it really has to start at the CEO level to say this is important, I'm going to fund them, we're going to protect them. Quarter-to-quarter pressures, yearly budget, can't deter them. If it's a bad idea, we'll kill it, but we're not going to kill it for sort of crazy day-to-day pressure. So we created this protected class of ideas. We call it imagination breakthroughs. And it was a way to seed new businesses in new spaces for us. And the most exciting example, well, one of the most, we have tons of exciting examples. One just launched this year that's very exciting it's our energy storage business, so basically battery business. And to give you a quick idea of how it started, hybrid locomotive has a certain kind of sodium-based technology. The team said, okay, this is great for trains, but how else might we innovate in this space? Has now come up with an energy storage system that's powering cell phone towers in Africa. It's disrupting diesel energy, cleaner, more efficient, different business models. From year 1 to year 5, we started a new business, developed the technology, developed new business models. It's a $100 million business in 5 years. That's what we can do. I think the key thing for us is there's a certain level of scale. That's always intimidating in a company like ours, is it has to scale, and it has to scale in a pretty big way. And this protected class of ideas allowed us to ring fence those ideas, but also test the kind of entrepreneurs. I mean, Prescott Logan, who runs this business, is every bit as good as any entrepreneur I've met outside the company. He had to be different. He had to try things differently than running the normal course of a more traditional P&L business.
So help us understand that difference, because one of the things that has struck me the most about working with GE is that when I meet the actual entrepreneurs who make businesses like that happen, we speak the same language. They are every bit the entrepreneur as much as any Silicon Valley person, and yet they kind of have this ability to live within a corporate environment where being an entrepreneur, there's not really a vocabulary for that. I get the sense that they're often getting in trouble, almost like they cause problems because as entrepreneurs we're constantly surrounded by chaos. So how do you help them, integrate with the mainstream and be protected from the mainstream culture when that clashes?
Well, I think partly you try to keep them away from the mainstream. So I'm not sure, you have to integrate selectively, right? They have to be protected. They have to integrate to get good technology, to get the right funding, the right people, but you want to also leave them alone. You have to go do something separately, and you find that people, it's a self-selection. There are people who are passionate and want to go this path, and there are people who don't. And so in some ways you're kind of filtering the people who are risk takers, who have that ability to deal with ambiguity. That's a big part of it. You don't have every specific toll gate. You don't know that your technology works. You don't know you have your first customer. Heaven forbid you know what your business model is. And you need people who are okay with not having that certainty. And they exist, and they need to be given the opportunity to grow. And that's what we've tried to do.
Why do you think someone who's got that entrepreneurial spirit would want to do it in the context of a company like GE?
Because you have access, you have scale, you have resources. I mean, this sodium battery technology is cutting edge. It came out of our research labs. It's good stuff. I mean, we have 6 global research labs around the world. There's a lot of amazing things happening. And so the other thing is it's tethered to real need. I mean, we're the kind of company that focuses on technology that matters. We're talking about telecom in Africa that's not only powering, an ecosystem and an economy, but also delivering it in a very green and efficient manner. There's a lot of good mission in that, and as well as building something from scratch.
Yeah, the scale of what you do is really, I certainly find it staggering whenever I try to comprehend just how many different businesses you're in. And one of the common complaints we hear about concepts like something like a minimum viable product is like, sure, that works for your consumer internet, easy software thing, but it'll never work like in an industrial setting. And people always talk about clean tech, healthcare, as you said, telecom. Basically, every business that GE is in, people think these ideas couldn't possibly apply. So, what does it mean to do a minimum viable product in an industrial setting?
Yeah, funny story. We brought Eric in to meet with some of our executives across GE, and they're, very, very focused engineers, some software, but mostly hardware folks. And you could sort of see the thought bubble over their heads going, okay, software guy, what do you possibly, you can do 50 change orders in a day in software, but I'm making a jet engine. It's not exactly easy to change that. So you could see that kind of thought bubble like, what can you do for me here? And these concepts like minimally viable product help tether it. It translates. Because what often happens, and I'm sure this is the same with people here as it is in my company, engineers want quality, they want perfection. And that's great. We want them to have that. Push the limits of science. But often it means things have to be perfect. And they have to appeal to every possible use case, every application. So before you know it, you over-engineer, and you have something that is hard to get to the market, hard to understand for the customer. So that simple concept of, I can get this out fast, I can test it, learn on the fly, and sort of giving people the tools and permission, that resonates, I think, in any kind of industry setting.
I was amazed, we were talking about things like industrial, turbines and big engines, and people would talk about those as a 5-year development cycle, which does take a long time to build. But when we drove into the specifics of, okay, how much of the 5 years is actually spent mitigating the technical risk of the engine itself versus dealing with the waterfall, siloed organization versus developing the channels, developing the market, all that stuff that kind of the engineers were dismissive, that was actually the bulk of the time. And so when you started to think about what would it take to get a so-called low-quality prototype in the market, the engineers got really excited about, wait, that's actually an interesting engineering problem to work on.
And in some ways, it stimulates their creativity. I mean, it says, wow, I could put an engine in that market, and maybe I have a service person that stands by 24 hours a day, and they start to think of different business models. So I think it does open people's imagination to a great extent. And we always like to say in sort of embracing lean startup, kind of the thinking in the company is, what would an entrepreneur do? It's all about connectivity to the customer and speed to market. Again, as a marketer, that's what I live for. You can fall in love with technology, or you can fall in love with how your customer is going to use the technology. And so we're trying to marry those two concepts, and lean startups helps us bridge that.
One of the challenges I have seen a lot in companies of this scale is that you're looking for very large scale returns. And so I remember we once were at a dinner where Jeff Immelt was talking about, some idea that someone had given him. He's like, oh yeah, let's put $100 million into that. And I was like, excuse me, what? How many zeros was that? He's thinking big. For it to get to his level, it has to be really big. And yet everything that eventually became big had to start small. So how do you encourage your teams that are looking for those big multi-hundred million, billion-dollar returns to celebrate the small wins?
Well, it is a challenge because you are looking at such scale, and it's just you take it one toll gate at a time, one step at a time, and again, look for smaller successes. Look for micro share is something we've learned working with you much more. Getting people to understand it works for this customer. Now, how do we scale it? Can't work for every customer out of the bat. So that out of the door. So that's somehow how we look at it. I mean, you break it down. It's like anything else. You can be intimidated if you think, okay, we have a $100 million commitment over X number of years, and we have to return, $500 million, $1 billion in 5 to 10 years, or whatever the time frame is. It's intimidating, but it's like everything. You have to break it down. You have to get to that proof of concept, first customer. I mean, it is somebody who you have to be very patient.
So one of the recurring themes we've heard already this morning, including in the example from the government, is that this requires executive leadership really from the top down. And so how do you get a Jeff Immelt and yourself, how do you guys think about providing that kind of executive leadership and support and inspiration to actually get people to do this and to change the culture?
Well, I think you say it's important. It comes from the top down. Speed to market, you can never give up on being too fast and too connected to the market. So that comes from the top. A leader that says customers matter. I mean, what's that Peter Drucker quote? Without a customer, there is no business. I mean, it starts and stops there. So you have to have a leader that breathes customer. And then you have to have the right funding, the right tools like we're talking about, and the right symbolism and teamwork. So in Lean Startup across GE, this is very much a marriage of technology and marketing. Mark Little, who's our CTO, our Chief Technology Officer, and heads up our global research, he and I are teamed in this effort with you. We've also brought in our Chief Learning Officer to make sure that the cultural pieces of this start to roll out as well. So it's very much integrated. You can't just say, that's that's the technologists, that's the marketers, that's it for HR. You have to be seamless and integrated.
That's not the default way.
Symbolism counts also, would be the other thing. I think sometimes you have to say, this may not make sense. I'm going to fund these 5 ideas. I'm going to put $100 million to that. It may not make sense to you, but we're going to go for it. We're going to try it. Just give it a shot.
That's really cool. All right, speaking of symbolism, the other day I was at an event with you where Jeff Immelt had come to Silicon Valley, and he was giving a talk next to an actual, honest-to-God, gigantic jet engine. Why?
Why? Because we love jet engines. But
it was a really cool prop.
It was a really cool.
Look up pictures if you haven't seen this. It's really.
But
he's got the big
basically,
toys.
we're in the area. We're investing very heavily in software for a couple of reasons. Because we want better analytics for our big intelligent machines. So a jet engine puts off 1 terabyte of data every day. That's one jet engine. Imagine if you run an airline, how much data you have. And so part of our theory has been, how do you take these intelligent machines and connect them more to the internet to be able to get better analytics to help airlines and hospitals and utilities run better? So Jeff came to town last week to say to the crowd here, hey, this is very important. We need the kind of consumer, social media, software, and analytics skills that exist here. Now apply them to industry. There's already monetization happening. We have a $150 billion service backlog. We can guarantee there are contracts against this. Help us build the next businesses. And a couple of things we launched were a series of quests we're doing. I think we've had, in working externally with entrepreneurs, we've done a couple of things. One, we've set up a couple of venture funds. We've partnered more in open challenges. And we launched there two new sets of open challenges called our data. They're basically data quests. One is around flight, where we basically worked with Alaska Airlines to take the most comprehensive set of data that exists publicly and say, help us build the right algorithms. Help us connect the data. You may not realize, but a pilot has access to data that the air traffic controllers don't. They see weather differently. Same thing happens in the hospital. You check into a hospital, it's filled with friction. How do you encourage developers and designers to come up with the right apps so that when you check into a hospital, it's the right kind of patient experience? So those are the kind of things we're trying to do more of, to connect our capabilities, our access, our jet engines with big access to big data, with people who, in this community, who have access to build algorithms, write programs, to be developers and designers to help us.
Okay, so if people want to plug in with these quests, how and why should they do it?
Well, you go to gequest.com. There's $600,000 of prizes. We've teamed with Kaggle, which is just a great resource. And we set up a special pool of prizes just for people who are part of Lean Startup. So we've kind of ring-fenced, and there's a Lean Startup set of prizes for anyone here that this crowd can vie for. So I think it's a fun challenge, and it gives you a way to say, take all the frameworks you know from another industry, from another framework, social, enterprise, and now apply it on the industrial side. It's to big benefit. I mean, this is something that came up last week. If a train could move 1 mile faster, a railroad could save $200 million. I mean, this is real money. And it's all built on sensors and data and analytics. So this is a big part of where we're building our future.
Well, thanks for carving out some prize pool for the Lean Startup community. We certainly appreciate it. And really, thank you very much for coming here and for lending your support, for being an inspiration to a lot of the corporate entrepreneurs who I know are in the audience and watching from around the world. Your leadership is really, we admire it.
Well, thank you. Thanks. It's been a great partner with Lean Startup. I guess I would say is it translates, right? I mean, this is what you're seeing. It translates. Entrepreneurs are everywhere. People want to have the permission, the tools, the freedom to do what they need to do to connect. And so it's been a great partnership so far. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Beth Comstock.